Right. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to deliver this talk as part of Adult Learners Week, an extra talk that we have in the series that Kenny runs. Okay, so the concept of aliens, the idea of aliens, is very popular in our modern culture. If you've come to see the exhibition that Kenny has mentioned, The Science of Aliens, from the Science Museum London, it's here with us at Thinktank until September. It touches on this and looks at it at the full scope of aliens and what that concept means. So, is there any truth to this? Are we being visited by extraterrestrials? Are there aliens on Earth? Well, to an extent, the answer is yes. The short answer is yes. There are creatures on Earth that are so strange and live in such extreme environments that they can be described as alien. And the second part of the talk is about that, and how the discovery of such creatures, fairly new, fairly recent, leads many scientists to believe that life must exist on other extreme environments, perhaps even in our solar system. And it's only a matter of time before we find this extraterrestrial life. But first we want to consider, has extraterrestrial life perhaps found us first? Now, many people would say that yes, the Earth is being visited by extraterrestrials, and a lot of these people would believe in conspiracy theories and government cover-ups and entertainment shows like the X-Files and so on. But what evidence is there that this is true? The thing is that so many people believe in this, millions of people, and a lot of them are just normal, everyday, sound-in-mind people, claim that they've seen UFOs, seen flying saucers, interacted with aliens even. So, we can't just dismiss this. This is what skeptics do, and it doesn't really help to just dismiss it as being stories from people that are cranks and so on. That doesn't work because millions of people claim to have seen this. So let's look at this a little bit in depth and try and understand perhaps what's going on here. Now, 80% of all these alien craft have been reported as being sources and continue to be reported as sources. Now, where does this idea of sources come from? We have loads and loads of low-quality evidence. Many such photos have been debunked as hoaxes. And we don't have even one tiny scrap of solid evidence of something extraterrestrial, something from somewhere else in the galaxy created by intelligent beings. We don't have that. We have all this circumstantial evidence, and even someone who should know, the president, the chairman of the British UFO Research Association, just last month he said, the problem is we have loads of circumstantial evidence, but not one piece of conclusive proof. And time is moving on. It's now nearly 60 years since the beginning of the flying saucer phenomenon in the modern day, and still no conclusive proof. So where did it all start? Well, we know where it all started. We have an exact date and time. It started on the 24th of June, 1947, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Why? What happened? Well, we had this gentleman, Kenneth Arnold, flying his airplane. He was searching for a missing plane in the United States. But let me put up the news article, the news piece that appeared the very next day, describing what Arnold experienced, right? This is the actual extract. This is the piece. The Associated Press put this out the day after. And it says that 9 bright saucer-like objects were flying at incredible speed. That's what he saw. And he didn't know what they were. He was searching for a missing plane. He sighted the objects between these two mountains, and they weaved in and out of formation, and he said they were going at a tremendous speed, 1,200 miles an hour. That's the article that appeared. Okay? Notice 9 bright saucer-like objects is what was reported. Now, what happened almost immediately in the weeks following, because that same article was published in newspapers throughout the United States, within weeks, hundreds of people started seeing flying saucers and started reporting the seeing of flying saucers. The only problem is, Kenneth Arnold had not seen saucers. The journalist reported his experience incorrectly. The journalist had said that, had incorrectly reported Arnold's actual words, and Arnold had actually said they flew erratic, like a saucer if you skip it across the water. or a flat stone if you throw it across the water and get it to skip. That's what he was saying. It's like a saucer if you skip it across water. That's how these objects moved. They were not saucer-shaped, but the journalist got it wrong, and then that was published in hundreds of newspapers, and it's basically snowballed from there. People have been seeing flying saucers ever since. What did these objects look like, though? What did Arnold see? He's written a book, and he's made a lot of money from this, but he saw boomerang-shaped objects that flew like a saucer skipping over water. Okay, and that's the weird thing, that of all subsequent reports, not one has ever looked like what Arnold actually saw, a boomerang shape, a crescent shape. But people have just seen saucers, or over 80% of sightings involve saucers. So we have to ask, if this was a mistake, why have the aliens redesigned their craft to conform to this error? They were boomerang shaped, but then suddenly people were seeing saucers and they conformed. That doesn't make sense. The infamous Roswell incident happened just days after Kenneth Arnold's sighting. This farmer phoned up the Air Force and said one of them saucers has crashed in my farm. And the Air Force went along, and of course the Air Force said it was a weather balloon. They couldn't say it was a spy balloon. That was declassified, and only in the 80s could they reveal that it was actually a spy balloon. And there we are, and interest waned. But 30 years later, in 1977, the UFO enthusiasts then resurrected the story of Roswell, and that's when the bodies and the alien autopsy that followed, and all that came along 30 years later. Nothing was ever said at the time. It's really interesting when you look at the history of all this. So what was this? What were these things that Arnold saw? All sorts of possibilities. We're going to look at what UFO sightings have turned out to be. The most likely things, perhaps secret military aircraft, or perhaps meteor fragments. Now, why do we say this? Well, secret military aircraft can look really strange to someone who's never seen them before. This is the F-117 stealth bomber. For a long time, it was shrouded in mystery. It was almost like a myth. Did it exist? Did it not exist? Until eventually it saw action. I think it was the first Gulf War. What's so special about this plane is that it's invisible to radar. So radar doesn't see it. It's because of the material that it's coated with and also the design of the actual shape of the plane. So there we have something that was a mystery. Obviously, prototypes were flown in secret places, and people didn't know about this until it actually saw action. The B-2 bomber, something similar. Doesn't look like a conventional plane. Again, very special, sophisticated, invisible to radar. For a long time, it was all shrouded in mystery. And there have been many such things, such prototype planes that have just been tested and have never been developed further. But imagine if you're flying and you see one of these things whiz by. Doesn't look like a normal plane. You see it for a split second. You might not be too sure of what you've seen and draw the wrong conclusion. So could Arnold have seen that? Anyway, let's go to another case study. 1969, June the 5th at 6 o'clock, commercial airliner reports the following. The crew all see what they described as a squadron of 4 UFOs. And these were coming out of the east, and they appeared to be on a collision course. And that's the actual report from this flight crew. Now, the amazing thing is there was another commercial airliner behind them, and they also saw the same squadron of UFOs. And they were reported by this airplane 8 miles behind. And then just to almost clinch this, we have a fighter pilot flying behind these 2 planes, and he also saw them. And he actually went on to say that these UFOs appeared to execute a climbing maneuver to avoid a mid-air collision. Now, you'd think, you have the testimony here of 3 independent groups of people. Surely there must be something here. I mean, surely they must have seen something. Well, fortunately for us, some people on the ground also saw this. And in particular, we had a newspaper photographer who had his camera handy. He saw the squadron of UFOs, and he took a photo. So, do you want to see the squadron of UFOs from the ground? This is the photographer's photograph. Okay, so here they are. And just so that we know we're talking about the same things that the airplanes saw, what was really useful was this electric power line, because UFO researchers and other investigators were able to prove then that what the airplanes saw were these objects, because that's the direction. The power line helped to get the orientation right. So that's what were seen and described as squadron of UFOs. But those of you, I think most of you here probably suspect what these could be. Anybody know? Anybody have an idea what they could be? Yes. Fireballs, a shooting star breaking up, meteor fragments, something like that. That's certainly what they look like, especially if you've seen them before time and again. We also have one captured on video. This one fell in New York City. Notice how it's breaking up. It was quite a big lump that landed on this parked car in 1992. But just look at what how they appear to break up and how similar they look to the photographer's snap. Okay, but amazingly, we had these people, senior airline flight crews, the military pilot, they said it was a squadron of flying saucers. That's amazing. It's just amazing what the human psyche can do. This whole phenomenon, as you'll see how I'm going to develop this, is a psychological thing that's happening en masse around the world, and it's happened before. This is the modern day mythology that has arisen. In the past, we've had similar things happen to people and societies. Okay, now there are real-life Mulders and Scullys that actually investigate these things. One gentleman is Larry Klass. Now, he has specialized for a long time in UFOs. After 40 years, he says that there's plenty of evidence to show that even an experienced pilot, a sensible, normal person, if they briefly see something unfamiliar, they can have flawed recollections of what they observed. That's one of the big maxims in my life. Don't trust your brain. We walk around trusting our brain completely. We shouldn't trust our brain too much, because our brain can interpret things incorrectly, and we see one thing and we end up believing something else. So anyway, that's his experience. Another question I'd like to ask is, which people in society spend the most time looking up? It's the astronomers, professional and amateur. But no astronomer has ever reported a serious UFO sighting. Yes, there have been UFOs, unidentified flying objects, but after some research, you actually pinpoint what it was. But Joe Bloggs, average person in society, looks up every now and then, and they see the UFOs. So that's also something to keep in mind. What about in the UK? Well, UFO sightings peaked in 1977, big time. It also happened to be the year that Close Encounters of the Third Kind was released. And this is another correlation that now is just accepted. When something is in the popular media, people start seeing things in the real world. For example, the British UFO Research Association said just last month that they're scaling down their activities. The heyday of ufology is over because of dwindling subject material. Some branches, some regional affiliates have closed down. Some have blamed the end of the X-Files series for waning interest. Again, it's correlated to popular media and entertainment. Okay, another investigator, Joe Nickell, who investigates paranormal things of all sorts, not just UFOs. Why do people, normal people, why are they capable of believing really crazy things? And he puts it down to two very powerful emotions that we all have, our hopes and fears. And he says that these two work together, because we are hopeful, for example, that ghosts exist, because that means we live after we die. We could even be in touch with our loved ones that have passed away. But at the same time, it's a scary thought to think that there are dead people walking around. So those two emotions happen together, and they're very primitive emotions, very deep-seated. And then he applies that to aliens. We hope that aliens exist because we're not alone. They could help us and save us from ourselves, and so on and so on. But on the other hand, what are they doing here? Why are they so hard to detect? Could they be involved in something sinister? So those are emotions that come into play. Really then, though, people that investigate the subject, it seems that it's more a case of wishful thinking. People want to believe something, and then they go out and look for the evidence. Now, skeptics, and I think a lot of us here are probably in that group, skeptics, we sometimes make that mistake that we start with the answer as well. We say, no, there are no aliens. There just can't be evidence. Whatever you're talking about is just not evidence. There are no extraterrestrials visiting. Skeptics do not deny that we are being visited by extraterrestrials. We shouldn't deny that. But what we do deny is that there's any evidence to support that. There's a difference there. That's how you keep an open mind, a proper open mind. We deny that there's any evidence, but tomorrow the evidence could come in. But that's what gets a lot of people upset, because skeptics appear to be as entrenched as the UFO supporters at times. Here's what somebody also has to say, an important person. It would be an amazing feat for intelligent extraterrestrials to come to the Earth, but then why do they just create a few crop circles and abduct a few people who are clearly not well? That's something else we need to consider. So what could these sightings be? Well, there we have a well-known constellation with a mysterious light passing through it. For people who don't know that it's a satellite, or the International Space Station in that case, they might wonder what it is that they're seeing up in the sky. What about that? That is a cloud. It's a lenticular cloud. It's a cloud that forms certain parts of the world because of the climate. Here's one over some telescopes. That certainly looks like a flying saucer. That looks like something spooky just over the horizon. What could it be? It's just the sun setting. Some more lenticular clouds. Perhaps people have mistaken those to be flying saucers. Some of them are really beautiful. There's even one that looks like a mothership with a little UFO coming out of it. Another conclusion, the likelihood that people will accept even a crazy explanation is directly related to how many alternatives they have to choose from. So if somebody sees something unusual and they can't for the world then think of any other explanation, they will conclude, well, it must be extraterrestrials. But if they are given a few options, well, could it be this, could it be this, or could it be that, then they're less likely to choose the crazy explanation. So maybe when we answer questions with people, we should go through the list of possibilities. What have UFO sightings turned out to be? Well, after decades of investigation, unconventional aircraft we've talked about, or even normal aircraft under difficult or unusual lighting patterns, they've turned out to be high-altitude balloons, kites and parachutes, even insects, soap bubbles and feathers that are much closer than people think. They appear to be something far away. Planets, we know planets are very bright and sometimes they may twinkle if they're low on the horizon. Mirages, we've looked at the lenticular clouds. This one I've put in because I had an experience with this. I was at the Armagh Planetarium in Northern Ireland, and people phone planetariums when they see something strange. And that's what these people said. They said, you know, we were driving home and we saw these circular lights in the sky, and they were these circular objects in the sky, and they were shining light down onto the ground. So I thought, wow, this sounds, you know, but you have to, because they sounded very rational. A lot of them actually say, listen, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but this is what I saw. So they are aware that they've seen something strange, but they don't want you to think that they're mad. Anyway, so I couldn't figure this out. So I passed them on to the Irish Astronomical Association. And then Terry Moseley, who was the president then, and he's an editor of the Sky at Night magazine now, he figured it out because he asked them, was it cloudy? Was it overcast? And it was. I hadn't asked them that. So these were just country folk driving home. It was very dark. They'd never seen searchlights before. So there were these circles reflecting off the clouds. And they saw them as moving objects in the sky with light coming down from them. And they were, you know, sincerely and honestly confused. But that's what they were. I assume that's some sort of circular-shaped lightning, shooting stars, the satellites, and then, of course, on radar, you have waves that sometimes travel unusual paths. And then that's, of course, not mentioning all the hoax, fakes, and pranks. That's what people like Joe Nickell and Larry Klass do. They go out and they separate. And there's a small percentage of experiences that we haven't explained, we cannot explain. But most of them we can. Now, if you're going to make the claim that we are being visited by highly intelligent, very advanced, independently evolved extraterrestrials, that's an amazingly extraordinary claim. So it's only reasonable to expect extraordinary evidence, not just anecdotal evidence or anything like that. You want some hardcore evidence if you're going to make a claim like that. And then if you see something or encounter something that you cannot explain in life, there is a rule that tends to work, and that is that the simplest explanation normally is the right one. There are some amazing magazines out there. The one I subscribe to is called Skeptic, and it's really just fascinating because you learn a lot about human psychology with all sorts of claims and paranormal happenings that are investigated. There's another one called the Skeptical Inquirer, and that's by the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. And what it is if there's some unusual happening, something's reported, they ask a local scientist to go and investigate it. And they just apply the scientific method and then they publish an article. And it's amazing what you learn. So some really interesting reading out there. I've also got a few copies of this article for you, so make sure you get one of these before you leave. Because this is really good. You see, this guy who's a psychologist, he says, like we've said, you cannot just dismiss what millions and millions of people have reported in the last 60 years. They're not all crazy. Something is going on. Either we are being visited by extraterrestrials, or there's something that he calls a psychocultural phenomenon taking place, psychology and culture. And he puts these two to the test. And it makes fascinating reading. It's really good. So make sure you get one of these on the way out. There's also a timeline of how aliens from 1947, the aliens that people have reported, how they've changed and how we've settled for the little gray men with the almond eyes and so on. Okay, so Chris Carter, the creator of the X-Files, would want us to believe that the truth is out there, it's being kept from us, and we have to keep looking for it. Bart Simpson would say that the truth is not out there. I would say that the truth is not rare. I would say that if you go and you research this and you do it honestly, without any preconceived notions or personal wishes, I think there's more than enough evidence to explain what we've experienced over the last 60 years for you to draw a sound conclusion. Okay. Now, what about the real aliens? Well, as I said in the beginning, there are real aliens on Earth. I think you can describe them as aliens. We live on a planet that's shattered. The crust is broken up into these plates that move very slowly, about the rate that your fingernail grows each year. And that means that in certain parts, well, that's how the continents have shifted over millions and millions of years through the motion of these plates, tectonic plates. And we have a great show that will be in the planetarium during the second half of the year called The Future is Wild. And there we look at what the world would look like in millions and millions of years in the future if these plates keep moving in the direction they are moving. And that's interesting to predict. Okay, so that's how the Earth is changing. That means that there are areas where there's magma, there's molten rock is surfacing, so a new seabed is being created, and then these plates are moving in different directions. And then somewhere else, a plate goes underneath one of the other plates and gets recycled. And that's how the surface of the Earth is gradually changing. Then what happens along these vents, along these cracks in the seafloor, is you get this hot magma, molten rock, and then water seeps down. It's near the surface, so the seawater seeps down. It picks up all these heavy metal ions. There's a lot of hydrogen sulfide, and these hydrothermal vents come shooting out, black or white smoke as they're called. Now these were discovered fairly recently, 1977. and the smoke is actually these precipitates, these heavy metal precipitates, and then this mineral tube is formed by all this precipitate. And these exist like 4 kilometers down under the ocean. And of course, the temperatures vary quite wildly, about 350 degrees there. The water's freezing cold, but there are areas around the vent that are quite comfortable at 23 degrees. Right. Okay, there should be an image underneath there, but what you've got around these vents is thick carpets of bacteria growing. They live off this hydrogen sulfide, and it's at 100 degrees or more Celsius that this bacteria is thriving, and it's a very ancient form of bacteria. Now, a quick summary of the different types of bacteria. The bacteria that we encounter would be the bacteria growing at room temperature, between 20 and 45 degrees. These are the ones that make us ill. We've known about bacteria that love the cold. They grow best at 10 degrees. We've known about bacteria that love high temperatures, compost heaps, thermal springs, 60 degrees plus. That's pretty hot, but they're comfortable there. But again, relatively recently, we've discovered the hyperthermophiles, a very ancient form of bacteria, and they grow at 120 degrees. It's 20 degrees over the boiling point of water. And it's this type of bacteria that grows around the hydrothermal vents. And also, it's a very ancient bacterium. Okay. Now, most microbes and our cells, our body cells, we're made of eukaryotic cells, and we cannot survive over 50 degrees because the molecules become unstable. If things get really hot, above 70 degrees, then the protein structure breaks down. Like when you fry an egg, the albumin is sort of see-through, but then it reaches a certain temperature and it goes white, it denatures, and the cell structure is ruined. Okay, and the cell dies. But how can these hyperthermophiles grow at almost double that temperature? How do they do it? Do they have unusual proteins? Well, it turns out they don't. The proteins are the same proteins that all other living things on Earth have, and made of the same 20 amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. Maybe the protein structure, because proteins, they each have unique structures. That's why they work so well. Do they have unusual structures? No, it turns out they have the same basic structures. The best explanation we have is that the cells, the metabolism in the cell is just slightly different. There are subtle differences in the way they metabolize, and that allows them to live happily over 100 degrees Celsius. So what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't take much to make an alien. It doesn't take much. You just change the way the cell works a little bit, tweak it a little bit, and suddenly you can live at 100 degrees Celsius plus. Now, here on Earth, we used to believe up until 1977 that the primary source of all energy is the sun. And then by this amazing process of photosynthesis, this energy is converted into carbohydrates and food for the rest of the creatures on Earth. But now here, down in the depths of the ocean with the hydrothermal vents, there is no sunlight, right? It's pitch black there. So where does the primary source of energy come? It comes from hydrogen sulfide, and through chemosynthesis, it's bacteria that use this hydrogen sulfide as their primary source of energy. Hydrogen sulfide is poisonous. It's the smell of rotten eggs, and yet this horrible substance is the source of life down here at the bottom of the seabed. So it was previously unknown. We're 4 kilometers down. It's not just a few creatures. There's a food web of up to 300 different species that depend on sulfur, and they're not barely hanging on. They're actually very productive, and it's a very efficient use of this energy. These are just some of the creatures down there. A great film to come and see is the IMAX film, Aliens of the Deep, 3D, that's showing right now, where you go down to the bottom of the ocean with these submersibles, and it's in 3D, so you really feel like you're down there looking at these creatures. Okay, so just a quick summary. We used to think that life needed sunlight, a comfortable temperature, comfortable acidity, pH, average pressure. Instead, we found that you don't need sunlight. You can exist in extreme temperatures. It's also very acidic. And extreme pressure, 1.5 tons per centimeter squared. And so these creatures are called extremophiles because they thrive in extreme conditions. So it started all sorts of branches of science, exobiology and astrobiology, for example, looking at how living things could exist in extreme environments elsewhere in the solar system or the galaxy. A few more examples. If you go to the bottom of the ocean and then drill down an extra 3 kilometers, another 3 kilometers beneath the ocean floor, you find bacteria. What are they living on? Well, they're just eating the rock. There's nothing else to live on. It's just amazing how tenacious bacteria is. When conditions become difficult, bacteria create these spores, so they hibernate, if you like. And so these spores have been found preserved under the Antarctic ice, 4 kilometers below the ice, and they've been revived. So bacteria are very, very tough creatures. There's the well-known account of the Surveyor 3 probe. Now, some people dispute this, but from what we know about bacteria, it can very certainly be true. This probe was sent to the moon in 1967, unmanned probe. Then in 1969, Apollo 12 astronauts were asked to recover the camera. So I think that might be it. He's busy taking the camera from the probe. And when the camera was opened up back on Earth, they found on the lens, on the inside of the camera, there was common bacterium from Earth living there. Now, this wasn't contamination from the Apollo mission, but many think it was contaminated when it launched. So what it means is that you have bacteria from Earth that survived in space on the moon 3 years, unprotected from the radiation, in a vacuum, nothing to eat, no water, at minus 250 degrees Celsius. And that's why there are scientists who feel that bacteria could travel from planet to planet on meteors, rocks and so on, and exist on long journeys through deep space. This one takes the cake. Now, it's hard to believe this one. I haven't seen this study refuted or criticized at all. So I'm still going to tell you about it because I think it could very well be true. But it was a group of Canadian scientists. So they had 250-million-year-old rock, okay, and inside it there were salt crystals. And inside the salt crystals there were little fluid-filled bubbles. And when they looked carefully, they found bacterial spores. Bacteria from 250 million years ago. So they extracted it carefully, placed it in nutrient, and believe it or not, it started to grow. So this is bacteria from a time before the dinosaurs that it's come alive today. And I know they've done similar things with bacterial spores found on a bee that was trapped in amber. I think that was about 50,000 years old. So this sort of thing is common. Trying to just show you that life is very, very tough here on Earth. So if it can live in extreme conditions, could it be found in extreme conditions elsewhere? Like, for example, Mars. Mars is, in fact, very similar to the Earth. And we know that in the past, it used to be warmer and wetter. Of course, there's still controversy as to whether these sort of things are caused by water that's melting and running, the ice under the soil melting, causing these channels, or whether these are just dry landslides of the very powdery dust. When you look at some of the features on Mars like that, that's a riverbed. So surely there was liquid water on Mars. So that means there was a thick atmosphere and it was much warmer. Then we have famous meteorites from Mars like that one that some scientists still feel has evidence of fossilized nanobacteria, very, very tiny bacteria from Mars. A lot of people dispute this. Basically, it's inconclusive. It could be true. We have to just keep looking. Mars wouldn't really be that extreme an environment to find living things. What about other places like the 4 large moons of Jupiter? That's how they compare in size. So it's Io, Europa, Ganymede and Callisto. That's how they compare to the Earth and the Moon. Some of them are really big. Io is very close to Jupiter, and it's very volcanic because it's Jupiter's powerful gravitational force that contracts and squeezes and squashes this moon, and so you have all this volcanic activity. Now the same is happening to the other moons, but not to the same extent. Like Europa, for example. This is an artist's impression of the surface of Europa. It's a really interesting surface because you have all this colored material. Nobody knows what that is. We think Europa consists of a core, rock, and then this ocean of water that's covered by a really thick crust of ice. We don't know if it's liquid water or like slushy ice, but there could well be activity down here, hydrothermal vents like on Earth, and you could have living creatures down there. It's a very fascinating world because of all these different features on its surface. We really are unsure as to what a lot of them are. The straight lines, we think they are these big plates of ice that break and move, and then they melt and then they solidify again. But we don't know what all that coloration is. Could that be some sort of algae or some sort of bloom of organism under the ice? We don't know. But even if there are cracks in the ice, some researchers feel that you'd have enough sunlight for creatures to be living along the sides of these cracks. And they would be solar powered, so they could be relying on the sun. Or, as we said, there could be the hydrothermal vents underneath, much like they are on Earth. When are we going to find out? There were other missions planned for Europa, but now these have all been pushed back because NASA's priority is going to the Moon and going to Mars. So tentatively, there's an Explorer to launch in 2015, and then a lander 2035. So you can argue, whether it's a good idea to spend money sending people back to the Moon when you could be financing interesting missions like this. And then basically we hear all the time about how organic compounds and other complex molecules are found in deep space, in big clouds of gas and dust. Things that we thought were really rare and special and only found here on Earth, we're finding them more and more scattered through space. Just a quick reminder of where we are. So the sun is in the galaxy, that's not the Milky Way, but the Milky Way would look something like that. The sun is one star out there, 2/3 of the way from the center. Now, this is a series of photos taken from Earth, so we're looking towards the center of our galaxy. Now imagine we take a little bit, that little rectangle, and zoom in to that. That's what we see. We start seeing how many stars are packed there in the center. Let's take that little field of view, that little rectangle, and zoom into that. And you start seeing just how densely packed with stars the center of the galaxy is. Let's zoom into that little rectangle, and there we go. We start seeing individual stars, big clouds of dust. But there are so many stars. Okay, we can zoom in some more. There we go. Now we start seeing the individual stars. Each one of those dots is a star. 100,000 million stars in our galaxy. At least that many more galaxies in the universe. So very, very literally, there are definitely more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand in the sea. Okay, now, what is life on Earth made of? So there's the periodic table. Those are all the elements that exist in the universe that we've discovered so far. That's actually them. That's all the natural elements. Now, what are we made of? Well, we're made of the most common elements. The most common elements in the universe are hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. What are we made of? We're made of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. So we're made of the common stuff of the universe. We're made from what's available, and we were made in a hurry too, because the first bacteria appear about 500 million years after the Earth cooled and was ready to sustain life. Now, people think, oh, we're special, we're unique, we're just so totally amazing. Well, if we were made of ruthenium, meitnerium, and bismuth, very, very rare elements in the universe, then you might conclude, yes, maybe there is something special about us human beings. But we're not made of these rare elements. We're made of the common, mucky stuff. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen. Okay, the Drake equation, instead of explaining it all, I think we'll do this. We'll do this vote, use the voting system and go through the equation. It's just a way of estimating how many possible intelligent communicating civilizations are in the galaxy right now, right? So what we'll do then is put up the voting system on the other two screens. And I'm going to just quickly switch. Right. So make sure you've got a handset handy. Okay, so we're going to go through all these factors of the equation where we're estimating how many other civilizations like us exist in the universe, in the galaxy, sorry. So the first one is, we need to estimate how many stars are there in the galaxy. Okay, so normally you see the number 100 billion. Wow, it's not there. Normally people talk about 100 billion, but sometimes you see 200 billion, 400 billion, because they are the brown dwarfs and all the stars difficult to see. So what do you think? This is where you can get to choose. So on the other two screens you have your options. What do you think? How many stars are there in the Milky Way? 100 billion, the red button, 200 billion, the yellow button, 300 billion, the green button. So please vote now. We only have 3 options for the voting system, so we've selected just a distribution of these options. Okay, so everybody done that? Let's see the result. So most of you say 200 billion. Okay, good. So let's plug that into the equation then. 200,000 million stars in the galaxy, the Milky Way. Now, of all these stars, 200,000 million stars, how many of them have planets around them? 0.1%, 1%, 10%, 30%, do they all have planets around them? Well, let's see what we've got as options for the voting. The fraction of stars with planets around them, we've chosen 20, 30, or 50%. Now, we've already found over 160 extrasolar planets, and there's new ones being found all the time. As our techniques and the equipment improves, we're going to find many, many more. So how many stars out there actually have planets around them? The other thing to keep in mind is about half of all the stars out there are multiple stars, doubled stars, and then it's more difficult to have planets around those. So, right, so everybody voted. Let's see what you've said. The fraction of stars with planets around them, 20%. Good, it's good to be conservative. Play it safe, 20%. So we'll put in 20% there. Right, now those stars with planets around them, how many of those planets are in the Goldilocks zone? Not too hot, not too cold. Positioned where they can sustain life. So that, well, it depends. In our solar system, we generally say there are 2, Mars and the Earth. So how many planets in these extrasolar systems, how many of those planets would be able to sustain life? In other words, they wouldn't be really hot like Mercury or Venus, or extremely cold like Neptune or Pluto. 1 in every 2 star systems, or 1 per system, or 2 per system. Okay, everybody voted? Okay, so what we've done so far is we've said there's 200,000 million stars, and then we've said 20% of them have planets. Now, of those 20% that have planets, in all those solar systems, how many planets per system is capable of sustaining life. So that's what this is. Is it half? In other words, 1 for every 2? Or is it 1 per system or 2 per system, as with our system? Okay, so everybody voted. Let's see what you've said. You've said 1 for every 2 systems. That's fine. So it's 0.5 then, the number of planets per star ecologically able to sustain life. Okay, so here we've got now a certain number of planets that can sustain life. But now, in how many of those planets does life actually evolve? Okay, now it's interesting here that, well, the range could be anything from 0.1 to 100%. Now you'll be amazed that many scientists think that it's 100%, because they say as soon as you have a planet that can sustain life, sooner or later life will definitely evolve. That's one view. What do you think? If a planet can sustain life, what percentage of those planets will actually evolve life? Will life actually arise on? So that's our next one. The fraction of planets where life actually evolves. 20%, 50%, or 100%. I mean, look at Earth. It cooled down, and before you knew it, there was bacteria. Okay, maybe they evolved here, or maybe they came from meteorites elsewhere, but that's what happened on Earth. A lot of this is speculation now. This is unknown, but it's a fun exercise. And you can be as conservative as you like. Actually, the more conservative, the better. Okay, everyone voted? So, the fraction of planets where life actually evolves. Oh, I missed it. I thought I pressed it. Here we go. Okay, so it's 20%. So 20% will actually evolve life. So 1 out of 5 will actually have life arise on it. Okay, so life arises on 1 of 5 of these planets that can sustain life. Now, what fraction will actually evolve intelligent life? Okay, so again, this is all up in the air. What do we mean by intelligent life? I suppose we mean things like dolphins, chimpanzees, human beings. What percentage will evolve intelligent life? Will the bacterial life eventually end up as intelligent life? 0.1% or up to 50%? This is a really tricky one. No one knows this. This is an absolute total guess. The dinosaurs were around for over 200 million years. They didn't evolve higher intelligence. So what fraction of those planets that evolve intelligent, what fraction of those planets will evolve intelligent life? 0.1, 1%, or 10%. We've got to keep these low because it seems that intelligent life is not something that happens very easily. But then again, we don't know. Okay, so everybody voted. Let's see. So you've said 0.1. Good. So there we are. The fraction of planets that evolve intelligent life is 0.1. So is that all right so far? 220.5, 0.1. Okay, now you might have intelligent life on the planet, but that intelligent life might not be interested in communicating. So we need to look at what fraction, let's go right up. So what fraction of that of the planets that have intelligent life that actually communicates, that bothers with radio astronomy? Maybe they just want to compose poetry all day long. Or maybe like dolphins, they're not going to build radio telescopes, or chimpanzees, they're not interested in astronomy, whatever. So what fraction actually communicates? Again, the same range there. The fraction of that life that communicates across space. Because if they don't communicate, then there's no opportunity for us to contact them or them to contact us. Now, think about this one. You know, if you're intelligent, you're curious. If you're curious, you wonder about the stars. You wonder about how things work. Some would say it's almost certain that intelligent life will eventually communicate across space. Then you have to define different levels of intelligence. It's really up to you, whatever you think. So have you voted? Let's see what you think. The fraction of life that communicates, the fraction of intelligent life that communicates. Wow, only 1%. Okay, that is conservative. Okay, there's one last factor that we have to put in here, and that is, how long will that communicating civilization actually exist? How long will they last? Because they could blow themselves up, or they could be wiped out by an asteroid. So for how long do they actually communicate? So these are the options. We've been communicating across the galaxy for about 100 years, because our most powerful radio signals and television signals about 100 years ago started leaking out into space. How much longer is that going to continue for? 1,000 years? 10,000 years? Because the longer you last, the longer you communicate, the better the chances are that someone will hear you. So let's see what options we've selected for our vote. The fraction of the planet's life during which the civilization communicates. 100,000, 10,000 years. The planet won't be around forever because the sun, the star will eventually die. So what fraction of that planet's existence will communication be taking place? 100, 1,000, or 10,000? It's very complicated, this, because other things come into play. Now, without television and radio, more and more is through satellites beaming information down to the Earth, or it's being sent through cable networks. So less and less powerful signals are leaking out into space. So our planet is growing quieter. Doesn't mean we're still here, but unless we actually send out a signal in the future, we won't be detectable by radio telescopes on other planets. Okay, so have you voted? See what you think. The last one, 100,000 or 10,000? 1,000 years. That's quite a good estimate. So most intelligent communicating civilizations in our galaxy communicate for 1,000 years. Right. So that's what we've put in. All we're going to do is hit this big calculate button, and it'll estimate how many intelligent communicating civilizations are out there in the galaxy right now. Here we go. 0.4. Wow, that is quite low, this one, because that includes us. So what does that mean? Does that mean we are, well, actually, that means we've actually been too conservative, because we're here. So there's at least one. So I think that's what that means. I'm just wondering which factor it was that brought it down so much. Maybe it was the intelligent life being 0.1. But this is a fun exercise, because you can increase this. Let's say we said of the life that becomes intelligent, it's say 1% instead of 0.1. We go down, we hit calculate, we get 4. So it's quite interesting to play with this. So if anybody wants a copy of this, it's just a little file. Just come and see me afterward, or email me. I'll give you my card. Email me, and I'll email you the attachment. It's a fun little exercise, the Drake equation. Right, thank you very much for that. So just to wrap up, are we doing anything about looking for other communicating civilizations? Yes, we are. You've all heard of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. You can become involved at home. All this radio noise being collected by the Arecibo telescope, we have to sift through it to see if there's a deliberate signal there. You need immense computer processing power for that. So you could use your computer at home. This program functions as a screensaver, so when you're not using your computer, it analyzes a bit of data, a unit that's been sent to you, and then when it's completed, sends off the result and picks up another one. And there are over 3,000 users, and this has spawned other really useful distributed networking exercises, looking for cures for cancer, analyzing climate change, and so on. So this is just one of them, but this was the first. And of course, your computer could be the one to pick up that signal, that pattern, some deliberate message perhaps in all that radio noise. So just look for SETI at home on the web, and you'll find it. Okay, so that's the end of the talk. I think the popular culture aliens, all fascinating and interesting, doesn't mean I don't enjoy the X-Files. I think it's great for entertainment, but it's also a bit worrying how a lot of people take the pseudoscience and feel that that's actually reality. That is quite worrying because there's all this psychological thing. Why do we want to believe in aliens? Why can't we help ourselves? Why do we need to rely on higher powers? It's kind of shifting responsibility. We need someone to save us from ourselves. I think that's being irresponsible. That is very childlike. We are intelligent and advanced enough to be responsible for our own actions and to sort out our own problems. So I think there's a lot of issues there. But then the real-life aliens, if you come to the Science of Aliens exhibition, you'll see some of these creatures from the deep on display. They're really fascinating because the fact that they live in extreme conditions means that we could find similar creatures living on other worlds, and it's very likely to happen in our lifetime. It really is an interesting time that we live in. Great. So thank you very much. That's everything. Remember to come and pick up one of these. I think I'll leave them over here. But before I end, do we have any questions? Do we have time for questions?
I think we've probably got time for a couple. But before we get on to that, if we could just say thank you very much to Mario, as usual. Does anybody have a burning question for Mario?
I can speak louder, I think.
Oh, sorry, we can record them this way.
You've spoken of the smokers and the new form of metabolism not involving sunlight. Have there been studies made of the DNA of these organisms?
Yeah, as far as I know, yes. And this is also controversial because we don't know where did these creatures at the bottom of the ocean, where did they come from? Did they evolve up on the surface and then drift down to the bottom and adapt to that form of life? Or were the very first bacteria on Earth living in dark conditions using hydrogen sulfide, and then some of them adapted to sunlight? I guess analyzing their DNA would tell us something about that. I don't know too much about the DNA analysis, but it's a fairly new branch, looking at life living on the limits. Really interesting. So yeah, I think it's great to be involved in research looking at things like that. That's all I can say about the DNA.
Can I chuck in a little tidbit
sure.
of information there? Actually, studying the DNA of extremophiles is a very big field at the moment. But by the very nature, the fact that these creatures live at such high temperatures in particular, the DNA is actually slightly different in the content to make it sort of hold together better, which makes it incredibly difficult to study. In terms of separating the two DNA strands in order to read them is much harder because it's evolved to be particularly sticky. Do we have any other questions?
No, you first. You mentioned that we came to the conclusion that there might be only a fraction of biospheres which evolve intelligent life. But if you look at the Earth, of course, you could argue we've got 3 intelligent species. That is cetaceans, whales and dolphins, there's us, and maybe octopi. So if you've got that many on one biosphere, stands to reason maybe there'd be more.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Yes, some people are very positive when it comes to the Drake equation, and you end up with double figures, lots and lots of intelligent communicating civilizations. But then sometimes people are very conservative, but you always get an answer because there are just so many stars out there, so many planets. We have to keep looking. I'm always amazed how you meet some scientists who think SETI is a total waste of money and time because the chances of us actually finding anyone are just so infinitesimally small, it's not even worth the effort, not even the small amount that this project costs. But I think that's really crazy because it's like saying, you know, the lottery, it's not worth playing the lottery, buying a lottery ticket, because the chances are 1 in 14 million or something that you're going to win. But the fact is, every week somebody wins. So the way I see it is, if it's a small investment, just a small amount of effort, and the jackpot is so big, it's worth making it. I mean, it's worth trying. If we don't listen out and search, we'll never know. But this way, I think the eventual result will be positive, because either we will find intelligent life and the course of history will be changed forever, or after 100, 200, 300 years, we still don't find anything. What will that tell us about ourselves? We just could be very, very unique in this universe, in that we've evolved intelligence. And so the life of every single human being is so precious. It's a win-win situation, SETI, I think. It really is. People that don't support it, I think, don't have any imagination. Any other questions?
Well, first of all, thank you for a very interesting talk, Mario. I speak as someone who once considered joining the Skeptic Society, but when push came to shove, I just couldn't do it, you know. When you were talking about extremophiles, archaeobacteria, there is a school of thought which believes that they are linked to the origins of life on this planet. These are the conditions that they lived in when life first appeared on this planet. So I suppose you could look at it in a sense by turning your argument on its head and saying that we're the aliens because we are interloping on the world that existed when they were first created. I just wonder if you got any thoughts on that.
I don't know if I followed the argument. Are you saying about the first bacteria on Earth not actually evolving on Earth, but coming from elsewhere?
No, I believe that the first life on this planet originated on this planet.
Yes.
Like it didn't come from anywhere else.
Right.
It might have gone from here to another planet since.
Sure.
What I'm saying is that those archaeobacteria, the extremophiles, there is a school of thought which says that they're representative of the oldest life forms on this planet.
Yep.
In other words, they are the closest living relatives of the first life forms that existed on this planet.
Right.
So in that sense, because we have adapted to life in a changing world, we're completely different to them. Our proteins are completely different. We live at a temperature, 30, 40 centigrade. So we're the aliens in a sense, because we've appeared since.
Yeah, okay, that is an interesting way of seeing it. Because since the archaeobacteria, there's been oxygen added to the planet, temperatures and conditions have stabilized. So they were the original forms of life, and we've evolved from them. So we're alien to them. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Yes. You can look at it the other way around. That is interesting.
Is there good evidence that life only evolved once on this planet, or could it conceivably have evolved more than once? I mean, for example, you could imagine something happening, say, where Moscow is today, and life evolves from that. But on the other side of the world, perhaps a million years later, life spontaneously starts again. So is there evidence that everything comes from one common source, or not?
I think, and you must feel free to comment, Kenny, I think the evidence is that all life on Earth is related for various reasons. We have the same DNA structure, the same coding language for the DNA information. Also, all the proteins consist of the same 20 amino acids, the same 20 building blocks. So it appears that all life on Earth had the same original start. What do you think?
I would agree that all life that we know at the moment on the planet came from one initial form. However, I think it would be a great shame if there wasn't more than one beginning to life, and we've just lost some of those along the way. It seems incredibly unlikely that life could only form once on the planet in its history. So in the same way that we sort of seem to be losing species every single day, I'm sure at some point in the Earth's history there have been other forms of life that evolved completely independently from a completely fresh start, and they've just died out. Probably completely wrong, but that's what I'd like to think.
There are things like the eye. People think that, well, we've got the most sophisticated eye, but that's evolved a number of times independently, different forms of life. What is the number? It's very high, something like 20 different times that the eye has evolved in creatures that are not related.
It's what's called convergent evolution.
Yeah, because it's so useful to have an eye, so at different times, different forms of life have evolved eyes.
Like wings.
Yep.
Bats, insects, birds, they've all got wings, but they're completely different